One is to fight the ageist messages that we get and to really embrace it and accept it and say, this is a gift. This is time. It's the most sacred thing that we could get is more time on the planet. And then affirmatively, we need to start thinking about how do we make meaning and what are some really concrete ways that we can do that? If we can embrace meaning making, it's better for our physical health. It's better for our mental health. It's better for our families. You know, there's a kind of reconciliation and peace that we can begin to achieve in a much more concrete way if we embrace aging and fight against all the cultural messages that we get.
Hello, and welcome to Not Born Yesterday, a podcast dedicated to older adults and the challenges and joys of aging. I'm Miriam Goodman.
Not Born Yesterday is brought to you by Next Village SF, a local nonprofit providing older adults in the Northeast neighborhood of San Francisco with support to help age in place. I'm Lynn Winter Gross.
Today on Not Born Yesterday, as usual, we're talking about aging, but this time from a professional's perspective. So let's start with the good news and the bad. The good news is that we're living longer, we're healthier at our age than previous generations were, and the culture has kind of accepted us and adapted to our needs with classes and programs designed for seniors and created helpful additions in our homes like bars in the shower and less expensive hearing aids and even senior discounts. The bad news is that there's entirely too much social isolation among the aging, too many scams designed to take advantage of older adults, family members unprepared or unable to care for us as we age, elder abuse, and of course, illness and frailty.
But back to the good news. We are being studied. Our guest today, MT Connolly, has spent her career looking at the many issues concerned with aging, and she's a leading expert on elder justice. She's the recipient of the MacArthur Genius Award and the founding director of the Department of Justice's Elder Justice Initiative. Her latest project is a new book called The Measure of Our Age. It covers the realities and challenges of aging today, and it's a guide for anyone trying to understand and navigate aging. MT, welcome to Not Born Yesterday.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, MT, we've known for a long time that the adult population is aging and living longer, growing. Why isn't the culture more prepared?
Well, that's a really good question. I think because we're in denial about aging. We don't really want to think about it. We don't want to face it in our own lives or as a society. But as a result, we're going to have less good old ages because if we can prepare both our societal systems and ourselves individually and in our families, we're going to improve the odds of having a better old age. And so we're really undermining ourselves by not thinking more about aging, which is why I wrote this book.
What are some of the systems that have failed us?
Well, I go through several of them. Would you like me to
Yes.
take them one at a time? Well, I think the first one, and perhaps the one that affects all of us, is the caregiving system. As we live longer, which is the good news, people 85 and older are the fastest growing cohort, and a lot of us are going to need care at some point. And so who's going to provide all that care? Already we have more than 40 million people who are what are called family or informal caregivers. That's a bigger population than the entire state of California, where you both are. And that's kind of an astounding number of people. And when you think about the invisibility of the work and how hard that caregiving work often is, and how little either recognition or help we give caregivers, it sort of blows my mind. Because healthy aging and good aging depends on having a robust care force, whether paid or unpaid, and most people who are providing care are family and informal caregivers. So we should be treating them better. We should be helping them more. We should be figuring out what their needs are.
And what are some examples of that we could be helping them more, helping a family member more?
Well, it's beginning to come into view, but I think actually, for one thing, just acknowledging how hard the job is. Many people are providing pretty high level clinical care in their homes with very little preparation. So I think first off, to help people understand what it entails, what does it mean to have either physical illness or to care for somebody who has cognitive decline. I mean, people don't know that oftentimes. And providing opportunities for respite care. We're beginning to have more caregiver groups, but that's just beginning right now. So I think those are some of the places where we should be focusing.
So you were going to mention some of the other systems that are failing us.
Absolutely. So I think our health system is failing us. There's a specialty called geriatrics that focuses on care for older people in the same way that pediatrics focuses on care for kids. But last year, 57% of geriatrics fellowships went unfilled. Just at this moment in time when we need more geriatricians, we have fewer of them. And there's robust data that geriatricians and geriatric care improve health outcomes for older people. It improves health, it reduces dependence, or it extends the period of independence, all kinds of good things, and we're not doing it.
What made you aware that this was a problem for seniors and older adults, that aging was going to be a problem and that these systems were a problem?
Well, I'm a recovering lawyer. I started my career at the Department of Justice, and so my first view of these issues was nursing homes that were abusing and neglecting residents, basically. And so I thought, oh, this is a terrible problem. We've just learned about it. And the more I did research, the more I've learned that, oh no, it's not a new problem at all. It's been going on for decades. And why haven't we done anything about it? We do not have a trustworthy long-term care system that people can rely on. And I think it's partially going back to what we talked about, that we don't really want to think about these issues, and also that we haven't exerted proper political power in terms of demanding change. And it's not for lack of trying. I mean, there's a wonderful organization called Consumer Voice for Quality Long-Term Care that's out there working for better long-term care every day. But I think we as a people need to acknowledge and understand that it's in all of our best interests to have a good long-term care system. Most people don't even know that Medicare and health insurance don't cover long-term care. It's an enormous uninsured expense beyond the means of many people, which is why, circling back, we have so many people on whom we rely for informal or unpaid care, or it pushes people into Medicaid eligibility once they've lost all their funds. So we have to start paying attention to these issues. And a lot of it is also in the way that we've structured the long-term care financially. 70% of it is for-profit, and it's been shown that for-profits are worse than the nonprofits. And now increasingly private equity is buying it up. And those are the private equity-owned facilities are, according to some recent research, worse than even the other for-profits. So, we're making decisions as a people, and they aren't necessarily the ones that are going to serve us, because having a decent long-term care system is something that we all need.
Do you think that's going to change with political pressure?
I think it could change with political pressure. I mean, there's some simple stuff that we could do. We know that staffing is the most important factor in the quality of care provided by any kind of facility. And nursing homes and CCRCs, continued care retirement communities, get more than $100 billion in taxpayer money every year. And we don't really know how they spend it. We don't know how much of that actually reaches residents or how much goes for the good of residents. And sometimes we don't even know who owns these places. And so I think one simple thing we could do is require increased transparency and accountability for the funds, and then also require the kinds of staffing that we know are necessary to provide quality care.
So we on this podcast are always telling our listeners that you should have purpose and connection and meaning, and that's important to people of all ages, but especially as we grow older. So have you found that people respond to suggestions for what I'm calling intentional involvement with their lives?
Yes, and I think the uptake has been slow. And I think one of the reasons for it is something called the longevity paradox, right? We've extended life, but we have paid much less attention to how we're going to assure well-being in the time we've gained. And that is a matter of the social systems like we've been talking about, and I think there's some others, but it's also a matter of consciousness. We're being fed this constant diet of aging is bad, it's shameful, it's to be avoided, we should just pretend it's not happening, and if we get enough surgery or take enough potions, we're going to be able to avoid it for all time. And, we know on some level that that's not true, but in a sense, we're taking the poison into ourselves. So I think there's sort of two levels of a battle here in terms of our individual consciousness that then translate back out into the culture. And one is to fight the ageist messages that we get and to really embrace it and accept it and say, this is a gift. This is time. It's the most sacred thing that we could get is more time on the planet. And then that's the fighting back part. And then affirmatively, we need to start thinking about how do we make meaning? And actually, I sort of surprised myself in writing this book in ending up with a chapter. The last chapter of the book is about meaning making. And what are some really concrete ways that we can do that? Because as an abstract matter, it seems like it sounds kind of woo-woo. And I admittedly thought, oh, that's kind of woo-woo for this, book about policy and, all that. And it's not at all. I mean, and the science is really robust too. The science makes it really, really clear that if we can embrace meaning making in many different forms, and I'm happy to talk about them, that it's better for our health, it's better for our physical health, it's better for our mental health, it's better for our families. There's a kind of reconciliation and peace that we can begin to achieve in a much more concrete way if we embrace aging and fight against all the cultural messages that we get.
So you mentioned there are a number of ways to do that you wrote about in the book. Can you tell us some of those ways?
Absolutely. So the first one is love and connection. So obviously, to stay in touch with the people that you love and to really cultivate those relationships, but also to make sure that you stay in contact with other human beings, whether it's community gardens or it's book clubs or it's Zooms or it's, conversations with friends, that is immensely important. The second thing is to have activity in our lives that give us purpose. And that could be from giving something to somebody else to creative engagement. So there's all kinds of purposeful activity that I think is really important. And, the way that we organize our work lives in this country, you work at about 5,000 speed, and then suddenly you retire and it's done. We don't have good encore acts. Another way to cultivate meaning in our lives is to invite in awe. And people find awe in really different ways, in a night sky or the Grand Canyon, but also in meditation and in yoga.
Well, you mentioned caregiving at the beginning, and that's such a complicated subject. And I know we could do, hours and hours and talking about it, but I'd like to concentrate on the family caregivers who you mentioned as well, and how many there are and unpaid and what they're doing beyond what they ever thought they'd have to do. So is there anything we as a society can do to make it easier for the home caregiver?
There's lots we can do. I think we haven't quite figured out where we should be putting most attention. And as I said, that we're beginning to learn more about that, but certainly with respite care, meaning giving caregivers a break, certainly by reducing isolation, by creating communities of support and very real kinds of support. There's some data showing that brief videos about caring for dementia or helping somebody shower or how do you lift somebody without hurting your back, et cetera. Those are tremendously helpful. So I think there's much still to learn, but that we need to do more. I think having a better long-term care system, one that people aren't terrified of, is a critical aspect of helping family caregivers, because if people are so freaked out about using the care systems we have, or they're so beyond the financial reach of people, they're not going to use them. So that also compounds the issue.
I've read that someone has said that the measure of a community or a measure of a society is how they treat their older people. And
I love that.
Yeah, and I think that maybe we've been failing.
Oh, absolutely. We've been failing. And that's another of the challenges that I've tried to grapple with in the book, of autonomy interests and safety interests. And, we're adults. Older people are adults who have the right to make decisions. And yet sometimes the decisions we make might seem risky to ourselves, might actually be risky. Driving gets a lot of attention, but also people refuse care. People want to live alone, notwithstanding dangers. People might want to give away money to a flaky charity or to a new romantic interest, or may want to engage in physical intimacy in situations where other people think, oh no, you can't do that. And so I think one of the other aspects of really promoting justice is getting philosophers and ethicists to help us more in terms of weighing those interests, because we know that, there are good indications that curtailing autonomy, that telling people, that overriding people's wishes is really bad for health, and it actually undermines safety.
Well, MT, thank you so much for this important conversation. I'm sure people will have a lot to think about when they hear this. Our guest today was MT Connolly, author of The Measure of Our Age.
Thank you so much for having me.
Today on News You Can Use, we're going to talk about another way to live longer. No, not more visits to the doctors or new drugs on the market. It's about staying healthy by finding purpose. In recent research, people with a sense of purpose generally live longer and have a reduced risk of heart attack or stroke. So what is purpose? Purpose is the reason we do or create things. It's what gets us out of bed in the morning, our reason for being. Our sense of purpose can change over time, from our working lives when we were focusing on career success to retirement when we have more time for leisure pursuits and to be with the family.
If you can't quite define your purpose, ask yourself these questions. What do I love to do that even if I didn't get paid for it, I still want to do it? What do I have that I can contribute to the world? What is one thing that I want to experience or do or feel or accomplish so that on my last day on earth, I would feel satisfied and have no regrets? What are my core beliefs, my morals, my principles?
Doing something to help others can sometimes renew this sense of purpose and potentially bring health benefits. That was the experience of Experience Corps volunteers, older adults who tutored school children in the United States. They reported improvements in mental health and physical functioning, and they maintained their overall health longer than the comparison group. Over 85% said their lives had improved because of community involvement.
And to quote a famous author, Dostoevsky, the mystery of human existence lies not just in staying alive, but in finding something to live for. And that's our podcast for today. Our thanks to our guest, MT Connolly. You can learn more about Next Village SF at their website, nextvillagesf.org. Our theme music is from Hook Sounds, and Jason Dahlstedt is our engineer. And thank you for listening. We would love to hear what you would like us to discover and discuss. Please contact us at notbornyesterdaypodcast.org. Be well, stay strong, and remember, you weren't born yesterday. I'm Lynn Winter Gross.
And I'm Miriam Goodman.